Fablehaven, Chapter 8, Part 2. The wheelbarrow swayed as it bumped over a root. Dale managed to steady it. Seth groaned. He was naked except for a white towel wrapped around his middle. Sorry, Seth, Dale said. This is a tricky path. We're almost there, Kendra asked. Not much farther, Grandpa replied. They walked, single file. Grandpa in the lead, followed by Dale pushing the wheelbarrow, and then Kendra in the rear. What had begun as a nearly indiscernible trail near the barn had broadened into a well-trodden path. Later they branched off onto a smaller track. They had crossed no new path since then. The woods seem so quiet, Kendra said. They're the quietest when you stay on the paths, Grandpa said. It seems too quiet. There is tension in the air. Your brother committed a serious offense. The fall of a fairy is a woeful tragedy. The retribution of the fairies was brutally equal. Eager eyes await to see if the conflict will escalate. It won't, right? I hope not. If Muriel cures your brother, the fairies could interpret it as an insult. Would they attack him again? Probably not. At least not directly. The punishment has been administered. Can we heal the fairy? Grandpa shook his head. No. Could the witch? Seth was altered by magic imposed upon him, but the potential to fall and become an imp is a fundamental aspect of being a fairy. She transformed in accordance to the law that has existed as long as fairies have had wings. Muriel might be able to undo the enchantment's force upon Seth. Reversing the fall of the fairy would be far beyond her capacity. Poor fairy. They reached the fork in the path. Grandpa turned left. Almost there, he said. Keep silent as we converse with her. Kendra stared at the bushes and trees, expecting to find spiteful eyes glaring back at her. What creatures would come into view if all the greenery were removed? What would happen if she raced off the path? How long before some gruesome monster devoured her? Grandpa stopped, pointing away into the trees. Here we are. Kendra saw the leafy shack in the distance, off the path through the trees. Too much undergrowth for the wheelbarrow, Dale said, scooping Seth into his arms. Although Seth was much more blubbery, he had not increased in size. As they waded through the undergrowth, Dale carried him without much difficulty. The ivy-shrouded shack drew near. They walked around to the front. The filthy witch sat inside, her back against the tree stump, chewing on a knot in a bristly rope. A pair of imps sat on the tree stump. One was skinny, with prominent ribs and long, flat feet. The other was compact and plump. Hello, Muriel, Grandpa said. The imp sprang from the trunk and scurried out of sight. Muriel looked up, a slow grin revealing decaying teeth. Could that be Stan Sorensen? She rubbed her eyes theatrically and squinted at him. No, I must be dreaming. Stan Sorensen said he would never visit me again. I need your help, Grandpa said. And you brought company, I remember, Dell. Who is this fine young lady? My granddaughter. She got none of your looks. Lucky for her. My name is Muriel, dear. Pleased to meet you. I'm Kendra. Yes, of course. You have that lovely pink nightgown with the bow on the chest. Kendra shot a look at Grandpa. How could this crazy witch know about her pajamas? I know a thing or two, Muriel continued, tapping her temple. Telescopes are for stars, dear, not for trees. Pay her no heed, Grandpa said. She wants to give you the impression that she has the power to spy on you in your bedroom. Witches prey on fear. Her influence does not extend beyond the walls of this shack. Won't you step inside for some tea? She offered. What news she has comes from imps, Grandpa continued, and since imps are banned from the yard, her news came from a particular imp. Muriel let out a shrieking laugh. The crazed cackle suited her haggard appearance much more better than her speaking voice did. The imp saw your room and heard conversations from wherever Seth stashed it, Grandpa concluded. Nothing to fret about. Muriel raised a finger in objection. Nothing to fret about, you say? Nothing the imp saw or heard could be harmful, Grandpa clarified. Except perhaps her own reflection, Muriel suggested. Who is our final visitor? This poor lumpy abomination. Could it be? She clapped her hands and giggled. Oh, did our stalwart adventurer have a mishap? Did his clever tongue finally betray him? You know what happened, Grandpa said. I do, she cackled. I knew he was insolent, but never suspected such cruelty. We'll get him in a shed. I say, for the sake of the fairies, lock him up tight. Can you restore him? Grandpa asked. Restore him? The witch exclaimed. After what he did? It was an accident, as you are aware. Why not just ask me to rescue a killer from the noose? To spare a traitor from his shame? Can you do it? Shall I conjure up a medal for him to wear as well? A badge of honor for his crime? Can you? Muriel dropped the act. She regarded her visitors with a sly expression. You know the price. I can't loosen the knot, Grandpa said. Muriel tossed up her gnarled hands. You know I need energy for the knot for the spell, she said. He has more than 70 separate hexes operating on him. You ought to untie 70 knots. What about? No dickering, one knot, and your beastly grandson will be restored to his original form. Without the knot, I would never be able to counter the enchantment. This is fairy magic. You knew the price before you came. No dickering. Grandpa sagged. Show me the rope. Lay the boy at my threshold. Dell placed Seth in front of the door. Standing in the doorway, Muriel held the rope out to Grandpa. There were two knots. Both had dried blood on them. One was still moist with saliva. Take your pick, she said. Of my own free will, I will sever this knot, Grandpa said. Leaning forward, he blew gently on the higher of the two knots. It unraveled. The air trembled. On hot days, Kendra had seen the air shimmer in the distance. This was similar, but right in front of her, she felt pulsing vibrations like she was standing in front of a powerful stereo speaker during a song with lots of bass. The ground seemed to be tipping. Muriel extended a hand over Seth. She mumbled an unintelligible incantation. His blubber rippled as if he were boiling inside. It looked like thousands of worms were under his skin, squirming to find a way out. Putrid vapor fumed up from his flesh. His fat appeared to be evaporating. His misshapen body convulsed. Kendra extended her arms and swayed as the ground teetered even more. There was a burst of darkness, an anti-flash, and Kendra stumbled, barely catching herself. The odd sensation ended. The air cleared and balance returned. Seth sat up. He looked exactly like his old self. No tusks, no flippers, no blowholes. Just an 11-year-old kid with a towel wrapped around his waist. He scrambled away from the shack and got to his feet. Satisfied? Muriel asked. How do you feel, Seth? Grandpa inquired. Seth patted his bare chest. I feel better. Muriel grinned. Thank you, little adventurer. You did me a great service today. I am indebted. You shouldn't have done it, Grandpa, Seth said. Had to be done, he said. We best be going. Stay a while, Muriel offered. No, thanks, Grandpa said. Very well. Spurn my hospitality. Kendra, nice to meet you. May you find less happiness than you deserve. Dell, you are as mute as your brother, and nearly as pale. Seth, please have another mishap soon. Stan, you lack the wit of an orangutan. Bless your soul. Do not be strangers. Kendra gave Seth socks, shoes, shorts, and a shirt. Once he put them on, they returned to the back. Can I ride in the wheelbarrow on the way back? Seth asked. You ought to push me, Dell grumbled. How did it feel being a walrus? Kendra asked. Is that what I was? A mutant humpbacked walrus with a deformed tail, she clarified. I wish we had a camera. It was weird breathing through my back, and it was hard to move. Nothing felt right. Might be safer not to converse so loudly, Grandpa said. I couldn't talk, Seth said more quietly. I felt like I still knew how, but the words came out all tangled. My mouth and tongue were different. What about Muriel? Kendra asked. If she unties that last knot, will she be free? She was originally bound by 13 knots, Grandpa said. She can loosen none on her own, though it doesn't seem to stop her from trying. But the other mortals can undo the knots by asking a favor and blowing on them. Powerful magic holds the knot in place. When released, Muriel can channel that magic into granting the favor. So, if you ever need her help again, I will look elsewhere, Grandpa said. I never wanted her to get down to a single knot. Freeing her is not an option. I'm sorry I ended up helping her, Seth said. Did you learn anything from the ordeal? Grandpa asked. Seth lowered his head. I feel really bad about the fairy. She didn't deserve what happened to her. Grandpa made no response, and Seth kept studying his shoes. I shouldn't have messed around with magical creatures, he finally admitted. Grandpa placed a hand on his shoulder. I know you meant no harm. Around here, what you don't know can hurt you and others. If you have learned to be more careful and compassionate in the future, and to show greater respect for the inhabitants of this preserve, then at least some good came of all of this. I learned something too, Kendra said. Humans and walruses should never mix.